report that was released by the AARO on the historical record of U.S. government involvement with unidentified anomalous phenomena, uh, released in February. And there's been a lot of discussion around this report. Obviously, the report is not a favorable report for the UFO community, and I read the report. I read through the entirety of the report, and my assessment is that this is the mother of all government UFO disinformation reports. I think it is aimed squarely at Lou Elizondo, David Grush, and the Congressional UAP Committee, with the objective of diffusing the crash retrieval narrative. Disinformation. I think it is aimed squarely at and discrediting the whistleblowers and congressional committee members. That was my sense when I read the report, and I wanted to discuss.
Welcome to Let's Talk Aliens. Today we have guests Richard Dolan and Tim Alberino discussing their report. They're going to go in depth on the failures of what the report actually did, and we'll also be discussing the intelligence community, basically how it has gained way too much power and how they just don't care what the American people want or anything. Like, they have so much power, they don't care that we've lost faith in the government, and they just keep doing what they're gonna do. So let's, without any more wasting time, or without us wasting any more time, let's have them discuss, and we'll give our point of view as it goes on.
To discuss this report with my friend and colleague Richard Dolan. Richard has recently published on his own YouTube channel a analysis of the report, which is phenomenal, and I encourage everybody to go over there and take a look at that. As a follow-up to this interview with Richard, it's just very well done, very thorough, and I think Richard absolutely dismantles that report in a very professional way. So I am pleased to have Richard joining me this morning to discuss the details of the report, the implications, and where he thinks things are going from here in regard to this ongoing fight for disclosure. And I should say that Richard and I had the opportunity to do a private briefing with a few members of Congress from the UAP committee, and it was pretty enlightening, and we had a great discussion, and we can maybe talk a little bit about that as well. But Richard, thanks for joining me, and your thoughts on the report, and you can take it wherever you want. But what were the major takeaways for you with this report?
Thank you, Tim. And by the way, it's always a pleasure to be on a program with you. I've always enjoyed it, and I'm glad to be here now. So yes, the Arrow Report. I think, I didn't know that it was going to be dropped at the time that it came out, and but once I got to read it last week, I mean, honestly, there was nothing that surprised me in the least. And I know that sounds like, what do you mean, nothing to surprise? But there is nothing surprising in that report because it's been very clear to me for the last 6 years now that what we're seeing within the Department of Defense is a battle. It's a war between different factions relating to the UFO or
Agreed.
UAP phenomenon.
Agreed.
There have been individuals who have said from the beginning the entire disclosure narrative is a psyop. I have strongly, strongly disagreed with that. I continue to disagree with that. But I will say that there are individuals within the national security structure who want some level of truth on this subject out. I'm not saying that they want full, complete disclosure. Some may not. But there's a general push for it within certain areas of the DoD and the intelligence community. And then you have the old guard, the secrecy group. Sometimes that was an old phrase from the researcher Donald Kehoe in the 50s, and he used to use it, and I like that phrase. I think the secrecy group works, and I believe that there's still a secrecy group in play, and they are absolutely determined never, ever to budge more than they absolutely have to on this matter. If they can delay this for 50 more years, they will delay it for 50 more years. If they can delay it for 500 years, they'll do that too. As long as they are able to delay this, they will. And that is what I believe the latest report from Arro's All-Domain Anomalous Resolution Office, that's what I think this represents. So in a sense, what were the conclusions? This was, by the way, I looked into this. I just wanted to make sure that it was, in fact, primarily authored or controlled, we should say, by Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. And that apparently is true. I went through my own little questions, and I just wanted to make sure that that is the case. So Kirkpatrick, even though he's kind of not officially involved, apparently, with this office anymore, was as director and this team, and he put this together. And so what did they say? They looked over. What's interesting about this report compared with other statements that they've made is that they explicitly got into the history of UFOs or UAP. So in other reports, they tended to focus on more recent 21st century developments and so on. In this one, this was, in fact, it's in the title. It's a historical UAP study. And so that made me very interested because that is specifically and almost exclusively what I've studied for the past 30 years is the history of UFOs. And they had a couple of conclusions. First of all, on crash retrievals, they said there's no empirical evidence for claims that the U.S. government or private companies have been reverse engineering ET. Any of these claims about known locations. We all remember David Grush last summer who said, the specific addresses of where these craft and bodies are, I will give them to you. The Arro report said, yeah, there's nothing there. We've looked into it. We checked the addresses. There's nothing there. The information is inaccurate was one of the statements that they made there. And then the other conclusion is simply that there is no evidence in any of the historical studies or current that there's an extraterrestrial or, let us say, extraordinary, they didn't use this word, but essentially they said all these UAP are explainable conventionally as long as there's enough information available. And then so that was a pretty strong statement, but then beyond that, he went through a historical review looking at a couple of different things. So one was prior U.S. government projects that may have contributed to UAP reports. So he actually goes back to things like the Manhattan Project, that is the project to build an atomic bomb during World War II. And he said that the secrecy around the Manhattan Project and also a lot of the other national labs that dealt with nuclear tech like Los Alamos and Sandia and Oak Ridge and so on, that these also probably contributed to the spike in UAP. And I thought, where are you getting this from? Because when I studied the history of this phenomenon, specifically in the 1940s, when there were a lot of UFO flying saucer sightings over those places, like there were many UFOs over Oak Ridge National Laboratory, for example, in Tennessee. There were many very, very important and disturbing UFOs over Los Alamos National Laboratories in New Mexico. That is a fact. And, you know, what he really is implying, and this is either utter incompetence or dishonesty, it's one or the other. He's implying that their normal mode of behavior, just by virtue of what they did, contributed to UFO reports, but that were not legitimate UFOs. Now, what we know for a fact is that in the late 40s, over Los Alamos, for example, you had UFO sightings, for sure, that got the attention of the highest level scientists and national security people connected with the military, and they were having meetings about this. asking, what the heck are these things? Are these Soviet, Russian? Are these ours? These objects are traveling horizontally and then they're going up or they're going down. They're maneuvering. They're hanging out over very specifically sensitive locations. This was a serious concern, and yet this report just, in what I have to say is in a fundamentally dishonest manner, portrays these things as conventional. And it goes on like that. He talks about the flying flapjack aircraft. This is an interesting airplane. I mean, during the 1940s, it looks a little bit like a pancake. It's flat. From a certain angle, you could say, does that look like a flying saucer? Because it's got a certain kind of interesting body plan to it. But the thing was discontinued in 1948. It flew, it could sort of take off vertically. It had some interesting features about it, could almost hover, but it was canceled in 48. And there's no one has ever implied that this aircraft was responsible for UFO reports. But yet the Arro Report makes that statement, and it goes on like this. He actually talks about Project Mogul, which was the discredited United States Air Force report from 30 years ago to essentially kneecap the entire Roswell phenomenon. So, historical review, during the 1980s and into the early 90s, the Roswell story was becoming very, very significant. And there were a number of researchers who were looking into Roswell, finding witnesses who were still alive, witnesses who were willing to go on camera to talk about what happened. This was a story that was developing. And so the U.S. Air Force got on top of it. They were very smart. And in the early 90s, issued a report that said, yeah, actually, there was some secrecy there. We were launching balloons that were designed to detect when the Soviets, the Russians, would detonate their first atomic bomb. It was called Project Mogul. This was a real project. But the thing is, no one who's seriously looked into this phenomenon believes these claims. I am going to share my screen here with you. I used this slide during my YouTube show the other night, but I just want people to look at, that's a picture of a Project Mogul balloon train right there. And, you know, it's one thing for the Air Force to put out a story and not to portray these images. But I just want people to see that is a Project Mogul balloon train. And I would like anyone to explain to me how intelligence officers at the 509th Bombing Unit out of Roswell are going to mistake that for a flying saucer. You know, it's just absurd when you see the picture. And yet here is Arro coming forward and making this claim that, yes, indeed, we studied this and Project Mogul seems to have been partially responsible for these reports, and so on and on. So really, he brings up the U-2 spy plane. This one was absurd. This argument came out 25 years ago, and it was debunked by many researchers at the time. The claim was that more than half of the UFO reports investigated in the 50s and 60s were assessed to be U.S. Reconnaissance flights, according to, this is the Arro Report making this statement. They said, according to a declassified CIA assessment. Yeah, that was a CIA report that came out in the late 90s, 97, on the 50th anniversary of Roswell. This was more disinformation by the CIA, in which they said, oh, yeah, we actually were flying high-speed or high-altitude aircraft like the U-2 spy plane. And some people were mistaking these for UFOs, but we didn't want anyone to know because this was our secret technology, and we thought, we'll just let them believe it's UFOs. This literally was an argument the CIA put out in 1997. It was absolute nonsense. It was put out by the late historian Gerald K. Haynes, who wrote that article. I myself spent some time debunking that. I'm not the only one who did. To say that more than half of UFO reports from the 50s and 60s were U-2 is patently ridiculous and false. The U-2 flew over Russia. It did not hover. It was at 70,000 feet, straight as a string. It's
that's the absurd thing about these examples that are put forward in the report. none of the things that he cites in this report, none of these, the U-2, the mogul balloons, none of them can make right-angle turns at high speeds. None of
No.
them. None of the things that he cites are capable of performing the extraordinary feats that we see legitimate UFOs performing. I mean, it's absurd. It does not account for anything. It does not account for the maneuvering that we see these advanced aerospace vehicles doing. It also doesn't account for a lot of the eyewitness testimony of people who haven't seen, we're not talking about distant lights in the sky or some shiny object. We're talking about pilots who see a saucer flying next to their jet. I have a friend, for example, who was flying a plane, a Cessna or something like that, and he saw clearly, and he had an extended encounter with a walnut-shaped craft flying perpendicular to his plane for an extended period of time. In fact, he heard the occupants of this craft speaking to him in his cockpit. And this was an extended encounter he had. No rivets, the usual description of a UFO. It looks like it was molded rather than fabricated with compartmentalized pieces. And there are many reports like this, and this report doesn't account for any of those kinds of testimonies whatsoever. It's
That's right.
It's laughable. It's really laughable.
You see that Kirkpatrick in particular has expressed, in my view, absolute contempt for the entire history of private UFO research. I think he has no regard for it. I've listened to a number of his private statements that he's published here and there. He just put one out, an op-ed piece for, I think, Scientific American a week ago, around the time that this report came out. And he said yet again, what we need is proper UAP research, not conspiracy theories. And it's a couple of other things that he and his office have said, which make me think that they have a real contempt for UFO evidence. One is that they've maintained again and again that we don't really have a lot of good data. And so what is data from their point of view? Well, they want a certain amount of electronic data, which we all want that. We want electronic measurable data. But of course, the predominant mode of data for the history of UFOs is human eyeballs.
Exactly.
And that just becomes dismissed, truly dismissed by Kirkpatrick and the Arro team. And this account of your colleague, your friend who saw this craft, is one of hundreds of thousands, really millions of good bits of eyewitness testimony. I would encourage anybody who is really curious about this, take an hour out of your day and go to the National UFO Reporting Center. It's on the web here, and just go through the data bank he's got there. The reports go back many decades. People submit them all the time. They're up to date. It's not difficult to go through. And admittedly, these are not investigated by and large. Most of them don't get much of an investigation because we don't have the resources. But nonetheless, read what people are writing. It's fascinating. These are your neighbors, your relatives, your family members in some cases. They are right out there for anyone to read. And some of them are not well written. Some of them are very well written. Some of them don't have a lot of detail. Others have extraordinary amounts of detail. And yeah, it's true. You can't really know for sure, but we have the ability to make some judgments here. I think as human beings, let's have some respect for our ability to make some assessments. Anyway, I would tell people, go check it out.
What about the thousands and thousands of people who have actually encountered the graves? Of course,
Absolutely.
Kirkpatrick is never going to take those accounts seriously. But the question would be, why not? If you have a phenomenon in which thousands, indeed tens of thousands of people across the world, and perhaps even more, have actually encountered not lights in the sky, not distant shiny things, but have actually seen craft land in proximity to where they are, or be following them in their vehicles, right? And then they have the missing time, and they have a typical abduction episode. He just literally and completely discounts all of that data, and
None of that
that
exists.
is data. As I've said many times, the abduction material lends itself to scientific inquiry. It is scientific data, and to just sweep all of that off of the table as if it's completely irrelevant, you're discounting the experience of tens of thousands of people from all different walks of life, all different career paths, from the poor to the rich, from professionals, doctors, and congressmen. You're just totally discounting that as fantasy, which I think is a show of great hubris. And obviously, from the very beginning, when Arrow was first launched, I knew this was going to be a dog and pony show. I knew that there was a lot of excitement in the UFO community, UFO Twitter about this, but I knew we were being set up. The UFO community was being set up to be disparaged by this group. And that is exactly what happened. In fact, there are, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it appears that there are more than a few disparaging references to Skinwalker Ranch and the Bigelow Group in here as well. He kind of takes swipes at people, and you can feel who he's aiming at in some of the commentary, but he doesn't provide. Kirkpatrick fails to provide any evidence of his own conclusions. He just makes these sweeping statements, and he references the material, the government studies that have been done in the past, without dealing with any of the details of anything he's talking about. So it's just incredible. Again, it's a great display of hubris on the part of Kirkpatrick and of Arrow at large.
This could never be accepted as a genuine academic paper. It would fail. When we were in junior high school doing math class, you were always told, show your work.
That's right.
He doesn't show any work here. He makes these statements, as you point out, accurately, sweeping statement. What's interesting is that that whole report, it's a little over 60 pages. It seems like it's impressive when you superficially go through it. He's showing all of the historical antecedents of this report and how they also concluded there was nothing to all of this and so on. But when you actually study it, you realize how flimsy and how really all of this is simply filler. And there is actually no genuine data whatsoever. He uses things like the Condon Committee report from the late 1960s, which many of us have studied in great detail and understand how that was literally a rigged game. And we know this for a fact. He talks about the Robertson panel sponsored by the CIA in 1953. Same thing. And the whole history of Project Blue Book, as if there was never any controversy over how Blue Book was investigated. In fact, Blue Book was ripped by scientists throughout the 1960s as a joke. Everyone knew it was. But yet all of that is forgotten because people have no knowledge of history, essentially. And he gets away with these, makes these blanket statements, but that there's no data in there whatsoever. One thing I do think might be worth, if I can share my screen one more time, thanks for letting me do that. He makes a discussion of this thing right here, the metamaterial, which just caught me off guard, I will say. I didn't expect that he would discuss this. This was a piece, an artifact, I guess we could say, that turned up in the 1990s and made its way to Art Bell, the radio host at the time, did late night talk on UFOs and related matters. And it was said to have come from a crash in the 1940s in New Mexico of a UFO. As an aside, I will just say I happen to know, I'm very good friends with an individual who is actively investigating this via the original person who turned this into Art Bell. So that person is still alive, and I am not communicating with that person, but I have a close friend who is. So we're going to see what more we can learn. The point is, this piece of artifact here, Art Bell gave it to Linda Moulton Howe because he didn't know what to do with it, and she wisely gave it to a few scientists to look at. One of them was Dr. Hal Puthoff and Dr. Eric Davis, who are very well known. So this is what the Arro report says about this. I'm going to read this. He says, experimentation on alleged extraterrestrial spacecraft sample. Arro has concluded that a sample from an alleged crashed off-world spacecraft that Arro required from a private UAP investigating organization and the U.S. Army. That's right, because this piece was sent to the Army for analysis, where we didn't hear anything about it. But Arro comes in and says this is a manufactured terrestrial alloy and does not represent off-world tech or have any exceptional qualities. And then he goes on and says this is magnesium, zinc, and bismuth with some other trace elements like lead. Now, I just want to point out what Hal Puthoff said about this exact same material. Puthoff and Davis, as I said, studied this with high-level instrumentation for many years. And in 2018, Hal Puthoff described this for the Society of Scientific Exploration, SSE, at their annual meeting in 2018. And he just said multi-layered bismuth and magnesium. Bismuth layers less than a human hair. Magnesium about 10 times the size of a human hair. He said it looks like it's been in a crash, which is true. Some attempts were made to try to reproduce this material, but they couldn't get the bismuth and magnesium layers to bond. That's interesting. When we talked to people in the materials field, material science, who should know, they said, we don't know why anybody would want to make anything like this. They couldn't figure it out, in other words. They didn't understand, what is this thing for? It's not obvious that it has any function. And then he goes on, he says, however, time goes by, decades later, science moves along. We figured out a few things. He says, it turns out exactly that this combination of materials at exactly those dimensions turn out to be an excellent microscopic waveguide for very high frequency electromagnetic radiation terahertz frequencies. When he said that, I had to stop and look that up because I didn't exactly understand it. But what it certainly looks like is that we're talking about some type of anti-gravitic function. That is, the high frequency electromagnetic radiation is something that it was light. This is what I have come to understand. And I've listened to several analyses, I don't know if they're true, that speculate that by changing the speed of light as it goes through this material, if this is the skin of the craft, for example, then what you're doing is you're changing certain important equations. For example, there is an equation from the 1990s by the mathematician Miguel Alcubierre. It's very well known. And it's his theory of warp drive, essentially. So Alcubierre comes up with this in the 90s and says, actually, mathematically, you can create warp drive. The only problem is, in other words, you can create a space-time bubble around your craft, and within that bubble, you're still adhering to Newtonian physics, but outside the bubble, you're kind of not, and you can scrunch space in front of you, you can stretch it out behind you, you're kind of cheating around the speed of light. Okay, Alcubierre's equations, though, said the only problem is the amount of energy you need would exceed I don't know, either all the energy in a galaxy or the universe or something like that. Like, you can't do it. But actually, if you're changing the equation and you're slowing down the speed of light, which is what I have come to understand, you don't need necessarily all that amount of energy. As one physicist, Jack Sarfati, I think, put it, he says, hey, maybe a AAA battery could do it. I think he was being facetious, but the point is, this material is very, very, let me just show it here again. It's very impressive. It is extraordinary. It does have extraordinary properties. And the fact that the Arro report specifically mentioned this material to debunk it, I found very interesting and not a little bit suspicious, to be honest with you.
Yeah, just because you can identify the constituents of the material doesn't mean that you've solved the mystery. Doesn't mean that you've simply said, well, we know what the material is made of, therefore there's nothing extraordinary about it. That's a very unscientific analysis.
Exactly. So if they conclude, this is a very important part of this report, if they genuinely concluded that that's a terrestrial alloy, fair enough. But the thing is, we would like to see where actually, how did you study this? How did you make your assessment? That's an important artifact, and it needs a lot more than a blanket statement as such as we've given for us to take this seriously. There, again, he didn't show his work.
Yeah, exactly. And as I said in the beginning, I feel like this report wasn't so much a genuine inquiry into the UFO phenomenon so much as it was designed specifically to debunk Lou Elizondo, David Grush, the Congressional UAP Committee, David Frazier, and so forth.
Yeah.
Like, it seems to be a direct response from the Pentagon against these figures and against what they're attempting to do. And that's why it's unscientific. It's trying to persuade the public, as the government has been doing for many decades, that people who believe that we are in possession of crash retrievals and perhaps non-human biologics, as Grush referred to them, are simply being persuaded by what I believe Kirkpatrick is referencing as the UFO religion, by this phenomenon that's largely the product of pop culture, not based in reality, unscientific, the compendium of ufology, rather than being based in any sort of concrete reality. And that's
exactly right.
And as you rightly pointed out for a long time, and I'd absolutely agree with your assessment on this, and it happens to be my assessment as well. What we're witnessing and have been witnessing since at least 2017 is a factional conflict inside of the government, and perhaps even inside of the aerospace contractors. As you mentioned earlier, the secrecy group versus the group that's pushing for some level of disclosure. And I think that's more apparent now than ever, because it's almost like one step forward, two steps back, one step forward, two steps back from the government. The Pentagon acknowledging that certain sightings are legitimate, releasing certain videos, such as the gimbal, the go fast, and so forth. And then coming behind all of this and saying, yeah, but this is just conventional explanations here, which is remarkable to me, because I remember the name is escaping me. David Frazier, correct? The pilot.
Fravor,
Fravor, rather. David Fravor, who described in great detail the craft that he encountered with great specificity before Congress under oath. And if you just take his testimony, forget about Grush, forget about everything else, just take his testimony alone and compare it to the explanations that are put forward in the Arro Report, nothing that Kirkpatrick puts forward as an explanation for the UAP phenomenon fits the description of what Fraser was describing.
Absolutely no.
And he is an informed observer. He's not some dummy, he's flying his jet, observing this thing in a professional capacity. And nobody from Arro has given an adequate explanation as to what he encountered. No one.
Yeah, no, look, you're right on here. You're absolutely right. I would like to go back to a point you made a little earlier, a question that you raised, which we did not yet address, which we should. You asked, why are they stopping short of talking about alien beings and abductions, which we really should talk about. And the other thing, because that's a red line for them. And the other red line, there are several red lines. One is an acknowledgement that they actually have alien tech and alien bodies. That's a real red line, because to admit this, for the U.S. government to admit this, means that they're admitting that they've lied to the public.
Exactly right.
And as long as the people that are running the show, the people in power, the ones that have been portraying this ruse over the American people for the last 70 years, as long as they remain in power, they will never admit to the truth, ever. Fortunately, we have people in Congress that are pushing for true disclosure and government oversight for these programs. But later they're going to talk about the few key people in these intelligence agencies that are running these programs, and who owns the property, um, either the weapons contractors or the taxpayers. And it's probably going to be the contractors, weapons manufacturers, because the people have no right to the information as long as it's under private ownership. So, um, but they will be talking about how some like this there is a cabal of people that are in the know and actually have these crafts, and they're using it for nefarious stuff, like really bad stuff. And I'm inclined to think that's true, especially when you think about um, when Tim Alberino went down to Peru for the Pelicadas incident, the face peelers. The witnesses there seemed to think that they might have been human, but using advanced technology, meaning humans are coming down in advanced technology and ripping people's faces off. Well, that makes me think of inducing fear, blood sacrifice. Um, I really do think there is a cabal of people that are into these ancient rituals, and there is a non-human intelligence that also has been behind it all. When you think it back to the Native Americans, they would ride hundreds of miles on horseback to go slaughter an entire another village or tribe. For what? Not for food. There's plenty of food, plenty of land. There was abundant resources then. They were doing it because their gods told them to. Same with the old pagan gods before the Christian God. They were all idols that required blood sacrifice. Well, when another content creator actually brought all of that stuff up, and it actually made me think of the fight or flight response that people feel, that I have felt when these crafts are engaging with people on the ground. Um, I think there's something with conflict, fear, and blood sacrifice that some of these non-human intelligence entities, some they're into it. I don't know why. I'm not saying that all of these entities are into this really bad shit, but what I am saying is there are some, and I think the ones that are into all that, those are the ones that are working with our government. That's why they can't talk about this stuff, because they're doing shit that's so bad. Mike Herrera, he was talking about how they were trafficking people for on these crafts. Like, what the hell? They're using the most advanced technology in the world, and they're using it to smuggle humans. What the fuck is going on? Anyways, there's some bad shit going on in the world, and the people that are behind it all, they're they're all in these positions of power that can't be easily taken from them. They're all in these little groups behind closed doors. They talk about these things, and basically our government has grown too powerful. We need smaller government, and we need to oust the people that are in power. I know it sounds like some crazy lunatic type of thing to say, but look at all the wars and conflicts we're in. We're sending American soldiers to other countries to fight wars we have no reason to be there for in the first place. And why are these conflicts happening in the first place? Because some intelligence agencies are double dealing, pulling some really fucked up shit behind the scenes, and probably starting these wars. False flags, basically. So that's my take on what's going on. So we'll go ahead and finish this video and we'll talk more.
For many decades. And, look, I keep saying this, but I have to keep saying it. We're in an era where no one's supposed to believe in conspiracy theories. This is the biggest of all conspiracy.
Yes, we are in that era, but you know what? Fuck them, dude. Fuck them. I don't care. I don't care who thinks what of me. I don't care. I am here to get the truth out, to prepare my fellow men for what's coming, and to help them cope with the changes and the reality of what's to come. So I don't care. There's so many trolls and haters online calling me crazy, saying I'm stupid, ignorant for believing in what I do. The thing is, I don't just believe it. I have experienced it. I've lived it. I've felt it. That doesn't matter what they say. They can never take that away from me, ever. Or you. So we just have to keep coming forward. People like me and others, put it out there. If something happens, you record it, put it online. The more that we put this content forward, the more it'll open people's eyes and it'll wake people up.
What's bigger than the UFO cover-up? Let's just be real here. There's 9/11, there's JFK, there's COVID. There's a lot of conspiracies, yeah. But is there anything really bigger than the UFO cover-up? I would argue maybe not. It's pretty big. So the U.S. government cannot allow itself, I would say, almost ever to admit, yes, we have alien bodies and craft, because they don't want to admit that they've lied to people for 80 years. So that's one problem. Another problem is the alien abduction phenomenon and the alien beings, because this is a problem for which they don't have a solution, almost certainly.
Precisely right.
If I'm sure there are some skeptics watching this conversation, so I understand that. And I respect skeptics who are simply saying, look, I need evidence, I want to understand, and this seems incredible to me. That's fair. People who just spend all their time debunking, I have a little more of a problem with. But well-meaning skeptics, we need them. And frankly, there's a lot of nonsensical things that do come up in the UFO field, and they need to be debunked. That happens. But if you can just pretend for a moment that there are very highly advanced, cognitively advanced, and indeed telepathic beings that are here, that have capabilities vastly beyond our own capabilities in certain ways, intellectually, let's say. I mean, if any of the reports of the size of their brains and their heads is accurate, we don't operate the way they do. They have a vastly larger prefrontal cortex. They have a vastly larger area of the brain where they can engage in highly complex types of cognition, and probably much more that we can't even conceive. So if they're here, they're probably going to do whatever they want. And it's very likely that the U.S. government or any government cannot deal with them. And that is the evidence. The evidence shows from the leaks and every bit of testimony that abductees have said. So that's another problem. And then the third problem is, there are many more than this, but I'm in the home stretch of completing a very large study that I will publish on USOs. This is water-based UFO phenomena, water-based UAP. Underwater UFOs and things like that. Objects going into the water, coming out of oceans and waters. I've collected a little over 600 specific instances that I've written about. And I cannot say that I know for a fact that every one of them is true. I think that they are true. I wouldn't have included them if I didn't think they were true. But I will say I am extremely confident that 95+% of them are true. And I think they paint a very, very accurate picture. A large number of those cases are U.S. Navy. And what I will just say for listeners here is that there is a certain number of these cases where these objects have completely, utterly disabled U.S. Navy battleships and aircraft carriers and cruisers and the like. They've done it. And not just American, but they did it to the Russians as well, Soviets. We have cases of that, where these objects are able, for 30 minutes, for an hour, disable all communications going in and out of aircraft carriers, weapon systems offline, electronics offline, and in some cases, dead in the water, not even moving. The ship can't even move. Some of those. So if you are the United States Navy and you know about this, probably there's not much more that's going to be important to you than your aircraft carriers, first of all. They're pretty darn important. They carry nuclear weapons. They are your power projection to the world. And these objects are able to disable them. I don't know about intentionally or not, probably intentionally. How do you admit that to the world? How do you admit that to your adversary? Like, this is this is where I have sympathy for some of these secret keepers. Like, it's not difficult to see. Like, if you or I or even listeners were working in that environment and you were aware of the serious nature of this and that there's nothing you could do about this. By admitting a problem, if politically speaking, you're now taking responsibility for it. Yeah, but whether it's UFOs or abductions or things like cattle mutilations, this has come up once in a while. If you acknowledge that these things are real, now you're the one who's supposed to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't, well, now you're stuck. So there's a lot of reasons that they're not going to admit this, but there are certain red lines that from certain elements within the national security community, they just feel that they cannot ever admit this. There's other red lines, but these are a few that can get us going here. And but there's many others.
That's a salient point. That's a salient point, because of what advantage is it for the Pentagon to acknowledge that it's dealing with a phenomenon that it cannot control, a phenomenon for which it has no response? If the government admits, if the Navy admits that these objects can disable their aircraft carriers, their nuclear subs, what have you, at will, and there's nothing that they can do to stop that from happening, what use is that to the public other than to cause great concern and perhaps panic and hysteria?
Right.
So I do sympathize to some degree with as you said, with some of the secrecy. It does make sense. If you don't have a solution for the problem, then it's not very advantageous to announce to the world that the problem exists, especially if you're the U.S. military. So that's understandable.
Well, let's go to the on the other hand side of it now.
Yes.
On the other hand.
Yes.
So a couple of things that come to my mind. On the other hand, what we think is right and wrong on this matter, I often wonder how relevant is any of that. In other words, you could say that the secrecy group has an argument. They have a point of view, which they do. We would be foolish for denying that. I think that's just not honest discussion. On the other hand, you cannot stop the entire world of researchers from picking through the holes in the argument. It's impossible to expect me or you or anyone else who has studied this to pretend that this Arro report is legitimate. Because it's not. It's nonsense. It's an insult to your intelligence and to mine and to anyone who reads it. It's an insult. So we're on a path of inevitability here. There's really no way to stop this. The secrecy desire was inevitable from 80 years ago onward. It's not difficult to understand. It's also not difficult to understand how over time our society is developing the capability to poke all kinds of holes in that secrecy because it's quite obvious. And so that's the problem that we're at. And then there is an ethical element to this, which I would like to bring in here. It's the idea that we do have a right to know. Now, this isn't a debate. Does the public have a right to know or not? People on the other side of that say, no, you do not. You think you do, you don't. We say we do. And that's a values argument. But, and it's not one that necessarily can be resolved, immediately. But the point that the public has a right to know is a valid point. If anyone still believes in this archaic notion of freedom and transparency and public accountability, something that our government loves to use this phrase transparency now. Well, if they actually believe it, then yes, if you believe in a free society where the people are sovereign, then we do have a right to know. And also, just on a practical level, if there's something this important going on that has been this important for many, many years, and it is off limits to us, that sounds like we need to know. If we are, whatever path we're on as a civilization, one would think that we need to have access to what is true. We need to have access to what is true, whether it's good news or bad news. We want to know. And so on that basis, yes, like you, I assume like most listeners, I believe it is time, like we can't live in this fairy tale for much longer. It's just not working. And
the phenomenon certainly is not going away. If anything, it's burgeoning. And
right.
And so and also I think what's most egregious about the secrecy is the fact that this is not a phenomenon that's happening in the background that you don't really see unless you try and observe it, or if you happen to be, on one of these battleships or something and that encounters a UFO. No, this is a phenomenon that is affecting the lives of millions of people around the world. Again, going back to the abduction phenomenon. This is something that is intrusive in the lives of not only American citizens, but as I said, people all over the world. So that to me is the most egregious facet of the secrecy. Your citizens are already being directly affected by this, and the government knows. And when I say the government, of course, we're talking about elements of the government, elements of the deep state know that this is the case. And there has and so what has the response been to this legitimate phenomenon that's affecting the lives of so many of your citizens? Ridicule, denial. That's the response, and that is there's no moral justification for that. Zero, because now you're talking about something that is directly affecting the lives of the people who you are charged with defending.
I think that yes, all of that is true. Ridicule, denial, and now I would add contempt. I think that there is a real contempt that is evident in the attitude of Dr. Kirkpatrick toward
absolutely
toward especially private researchers. I think he really does look down on those of us who for many years have dedicated our lives to studying this phenomenon.
Yeah, there's no question about it. That is, I think that is the word that encapsulates this report. It's contemptuous.
Mm-hmm. It really is.
He puts forward this notion that the government has been forthright. The government has been telling us, you UFO dummies out there, the government has been telling you the truth for decades. Look at these reports. The government, what he's essentially saying is that the United States government has been very interested in the topic and has tried to see if there's anything to it. And it's, it has responded to the public's request for inquiry time after time. And it's every time in every circumstance, the answer has been the same. The results have been the same. There's nothing to see here. It's just misunderstanding, misconstruence of other phenomenon. And really what's going on is this UFO religion is driving the interest in UFOs. And he even alludes to this happening within government. Like there's factions inside of the government that he seems to allude to that are being driven by this UFO religion. in their inquiry
Yes,
into
does. He
UFOs, which
kind of
I find
implies that.
fascinating because that right there demonstrates exactly what you've been saying, the factional conflict. He's acknowledging that this factional conflict actually exists inside of government, but he's basically painting these individuals as loons, as people who are living in a world of pure speculation and fantasy, as opposed to his world, which is scientific and based on logic and reason,
Objectivity,
and
and
that's
so
why
on.
that's why that the word contempt is exactly right to describe this report.
I'd be okay with all of this, including the conclusions, if he just showed how he got to them.
Exactly.
This is a report that needed to be 3 or 4 times longer than it is,
Right.
at a minimum.
Right.
So it's 63 pages. It needs to be at least 200 pages, and probably longer than that, for him to actually show the actual work, the argument, the data that allowed him to come to these conclusions. Do that at a better level than you've done, because he didn't show any of it. And that is the problem. It's like, none of us, whether you believe or don't believe in UFOs as aliens, fine. We should all want to be able to see, we should all be willing to go where the truth leads us. And we should all be willing to change our mind, including myself. If he were to come up with an argument that actually provided the data to disprove a number of the things that I had personally believed up till now, fine. That's life. We must always be guided by where truth leads us. Always, we must. He didn't do that. He didn't show any of his work. He didn't show, there was no transparency in this document. In fact, there was fake transparency, and it was really just all filler. That's really what this was.
That's right. So, switching gears a little bit, where do you think we go from here? Because I think you've been very accurate in your assessment of all of this from the beginning. There was a lot of enthusiasm in the UFO community when the committee was launched in the Senate by Jill DeBrand, when Arro was formed, and there was the announcement that this official Pentagon research body was going to start taking the UAP phenomenon seriously. There was a lot of excitement, and I think you've had a very reasonable take on this from the beginning, which is, you were
Not
not
expecting disclosure.
right. Exactly. So, and I had the same perspective. As soon as I saw the formulation of Arrow take effect, I again, as I said in the beginning, I knew what we were going to get was a dog and pony show, just like NASA's review of I forget what it was called, their investigation into the UAP, which was also
a year ago,
completely laughable, and this concerted effort by groups within government to pretend like they're also very interested in the phenomenon. We're going to investigate, right? And it came out of the gates with the changing of the nomenclature from UFO to UAP. The whole thing was suspicious to me right out of the gates, and I think to you as well. It was feigning interest in the phenomenon, feigning a desire for disclosure, should there be anything to disclose. And then you had what I think was a legitimate response from Congress in the formulation of the House UAP committee.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was a legitimate response, and you and I know some of the individuals who were instrumental in that. We talked with them, and some of the congressmen, and having got to know some of these guys and talking extensively with them, there's no question that the core group behind the UAP committee in Congress are very serious about disclosure, about getting to the truth, are absolutely convinced that the government is not telling the truth, that the Pentagon is concealing the truth regarding the UFO phenomenon. They're absolutely convinced that there are crash retrievals, and there may be bodies. And these guys have even expressed to us, you and I, that they've encountered a lot of obstacles in
That's right.
this quest to uncover the truth. And there's even been a lot of personal attacks and very nasty campaigns launched against, for example, Congressman Burchett, to try and dislodge him from Congress. Campaigns that have been launched within the Republican Party against a fellow Republican to get him out of there, specifically because of his crusade.
That's what it looks like.
To
Yes.
try and get to the bottom of for example, Grush's testimony. And I'm very impressed with these guys, Congressman Burleson, Burchett, and Paulina Luna, some of these key figures in Congress who are mounting a resistance against what is clearly a blatant cover-up by the Pentagon in regard to this topic. And I do personally believe Grush's testimony, that he's telling the truth. I believe Grush, and frankly, I believe Bob Lazar. I believed Bob Lazar years ago, and it's amazing to me that people are willing to just accept the report that came out of Arro, this fraudulent report, and just completely discredit David Grush, Bob Lazar, and the other guys that have come forward with testimonies, and many, many others over the decades, completely discredit them, and then attempt to discredit the efforts by these congressmen.
It won't work. It won't succeed.
Yeah, right. So what are your
fail.
thoughts? Where are we going with all of this?
So I think this is the latest iteration of a battle, a back and forth, volleys being fired by both sides. And so this latest report is simply the latest attempt by the secrecy group, I'm going to call them that, to smother the topic once and for all, or at least for as well as they can. It's clearly not going to succeed. What you can see, though, is they're using the same tactics that they've always used. So they have domination over the establishment media, which they've had for decades. You know, back in the 90s when the CIA issued its report about the U-2 spy plane causing UFO reports, they got right into the New York Times in the late 90s, and that's their mode. Like they put out their nonsense, but they know that the major media is always going to repeat it. The Project Mogul, the Mogul balloon thing is another example of that. So, but now it's a little different. The world's a little different. They still have the establishment legacy media, and they also have big tech in the form of Google and Facebook and so on. But there's still a very large alternative community that's not buying this, and they know that. But they're still playing the same methodology because it's still basically all that they care about is not whether or not you and I or the public knows the truth. They don't care. We can know the truth. The only thing that they care about is that they don't have to do anything about it, that they don't have to make an admission. If the little people like us form our conclusions that there's a grand conspiracy, I believe their attitude, those who have the power or are in the know, their attitude is fine. Let the people think what they want. Doesn't matter. I mean, think about something like the JFK assassination. Everyone knows he was killed in a conspiracy. No one who really believes that Lee Harvey Oswald did this by himself. Like, no one really believes it, but it doesn't matter. We had a JFK Truth Commission 30 years ago in Congress, and that didn't do anything because the fundamental official truth is still inverted from the actual truth. So my point is, they don't care if you know or if I know. They only care if they have to acknowledge and do something about it. And so as long as they can keep this little charade going, they'll just do that. Now, as far as what's going to happen down the road, I would suspect, in fact, I have continually been led to understand that there is still a drive for more hearings. And to me, more than anything else, this is probably the biggest variable that can continue to move things forward from a disclosure point of view. More hearings. We all saw how potent the testimony of David Grush last summer was. He came out of nowhere and had explosive testimony that got him in front of Congress, where he made a huge impact. It is the understanding of many of us, including yourself, who've been looking into this, that there are more David Grushes out there.
Mm-hmm.
They are waiting to speak. The problem is arranging for their security classifications to be compatible with the congressional committees that are holding the hearings. At least that's one thing that I've come to understand, and also, I assume, ensuring their safety, not simply in terms of their life, but in terms of their careers and professions. So this is a delicate matter, but my understanding is that there are more people who are ready to come forward, and that there's a desire among members of Congress. You mentioned Tim Burchett. I have total respect for him, and I agree with you. He is, I think there's no question that he is tired of the lies and secrecy, and he's expressed that many times. I think he's totally sincere. Anna Maria Luna, Representative Congressman Burleson, and others, yes, they are part of a very small group, a clique, that are trying to push this. Why is a really good question. Maybe journalists and historians can get deeper insights into that, but they certainly do appear to be doing this for real. It looks like it. They've got people who oppose them, absolutely, within Congress, within the Senate, and within the military, who are strongly opposed to what they're doing. So this is a battle. It's a turf war.
They're completely aware
Yeah.
of the gargantuan forces arrayed against them. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
I've had candid conversations with some of these congressmen, and I remember asking one in particular, "Do you realize what you're up against?" I mean, this is really a David versus Goliath scenario here, because I think you would admit that the JFK assassination was a turning point in American history. I would say it was the inflection point at which the U.S. government was captured by the intelligence community. In some ways, I think that JFK was the last real American president who could wield the authority of the presidency as it was intended by the founders. I think since that event, the presidency and the government at large has been captured by the intelligence community, the quote-unquote deep state. And Congress has largely lost its authority to do anything about certain topics, especially topics that relate to national security threats.
Yeah, with a few, I would agree. There have been a few moments where they tried to fight against that. There was 1975, there was hearings about the intelligence community in Congress. And those were actually quite serious, but they were also captured by the deep state at that time. You had senators, Frank Church of Idaho was probably the most prominent Democrat from Idaho, great guy. His career was destroyed by that, incidentally. And then the intelligence investigation at that time was taken over by Vice President David Rockefeller. Mm-hmm. And the whole thing just went sideways. But it was almost like a last hurrah of the old republic trying to reassert it. But I think you're exactly right. The assassination of John F. Kennedy was probably the most important inflection point. You had a bunch of criminals who killed the president in broad daylight, and they killed all the people connected to that.
That's right. And
they got away with it. It was mass murder, dealing with a coup of the American government. That's really what happened.
Yeah,
and so we've never been able to discuss it openly.
Congress has a purview now. It has an arena in which it is permitted to operate. That's the way it appears to me. There are things that Congress is allowed to do, that the president is allowed to do. Then there's the purview of the intelligence community and the deep state at large, what I like to refer to as the dumb state as it pertains to UFO secrecy. And there's no authority to cross that barrier. There's no authority by any member of Congress or even the President of the United States. For example, Joe Biden, if he said today, if he gathered his cabinet together today and brought in the Joint Chiefs of Staff and said, I want access into some secret underground facility. I want to go there and see what you're working on. The response to him I'm convinced the response to him would be, no, no, you don't have the need to know. Presidents are transitory.
Mm-hmm.
They're not they're not a permanent fixture in government like the deep state operatives are. They're a permanent fixture in government. They're not elected. They get put into these positions of power. They stay in these positions of power, and they control the most important secrets that we have, that the U.S. government has, and the need to know. And by
They're essentially gods. They have technology that makes them into almost gods. And that's the thing. How is anyone in Congress supposed to demand that they turn these crafts over? Make them. You can't. You can't make them do that. They can literally have these craft in one spot and in another spot across the world in seconds. So there's nothing we can do to make those crafts come. The only way we're going to have these crafts come forward is if the person piloting it decides to take off and go rogue and bring it forward, or the people that actually have worked on these things and can reproduce the craft in the public eye, or you know, even if they worked on them and they give up all the information they have, by the time that information gets out, they're all going to have them moved. So, um, yeah, it's an uphill battle.
by the way, they are, according to their own charters, some of these groups are legally authorized to lie about what they're doing in order to maintain, the secrecy in regard to national security.
Mm-hmm. For many decades. For
exactly,
many decades. This has
precisely been the case. Right. And so there's this perception, which is a false perception. I think this is deteriorating. This is collapsing. This perception that the American people have held of the presidency and of Congress for decades, that the president can do whatever he wants. He has the authority to look into whatever he wants. That's collapsing. It's becoming increasingly apparent that the branches of government, the three branches of government, have been captured by the intelligence community and are being controlled to some extent. Again, there's an arena in which they are permitted to operate without interference, I think, from the intelligence community. But once they try to start to cross over into certain realms, the aerospace stuff, for example, they have no authority. They have no authority. And this is becoming apparent. This was apparent during the Carter administration. Jimmy Carter was perhaps most interested in the UFO phenomenon because he had some encounters of his own. He was very interested. He came into the presidency and immediately wanted to know about the UFO stuff, and was just flatly denied access.
As a president-elect, he had a meeting with CIA director at that time, George Herbert Walker Bush. George Bush Sr. was director of the CIA during the last year of Gerald Ford's presidency. And so Jimmy Carter gets elected in 1976. And this is an account that I learned from the attorney Danny Sheehan, who's a very good friend of mine. And Danny's told this a number of times, and essentially Carter wanted to get information from Bush on UFOs, UAP. Bush said, well, if you keep me on as director of the CIA, which apparently was his ambition at that time, not to become president, but to be basically permanent director of the CIA. So if you keep me on at CIA as director, I'll read you in. Carter said, no, I've got someone else who's going to be replacing you. And Bush declined. He said, I'm not going to brief you on this matter. And he didn't. There's another story that came to me from a source that I know personally, and I just can't say anything more about this individual, but who spoke to me and said during Bill Clinton's second administration, so during the late 90s, he had the opportunity to meet with President Clinton. And he's got a strong interest in UFOs and was waiting for his moment when he was alone with the president to bring up the matter of UFO disclosure. And he said to me, I finally had a moment at this event with him. We were alone for about 5 minutes or maybe a few minutes. And I brought it up. I said, he said, I was very, very pleased by your revision of the Freedom of Information laws, which Clinton did do. He did liberalize some FOIA laws in his first term. And this person said, I was very glad that you did that because I'm interested in the UFO phenomenon, and I think that's helpful for UFO research. So he was trying to open the door for Clinton to say something.
Right.
And according to this person, Clinton, the president, said, well, I wish there was something I could do about that topic, but my hands are tied. So essentially implying he did not have a whole lot of leeway within which to act on the matter of UFOs. This is Bill Clinton circa 1997.
Well, the reason his hands are tied is because he's doing stuff like going to Epstein Island and having paintings made of him wearing a woman's dress. Like, that's why so many of these politicians that say they want to get all this stuff done, but they never do, because they get into fucking office and there's so much dirt on them. They all have dirt on them. Doesn't matter who they are. And when push comes to shove, when it comes to that topic, no holds bar. That's when the big guns come out. And they will do whatever they can to destroy that person's presidency to keep it a secret. It is the number one biggest secret in our reality.
798, supposedly.
Right. And I think there's you might agree with this assessment as well. I think that there's a certain degree of, we'll use the word contempt again, contempt from the intelligence community in regard to the office of the presidency and Congress. Like, who do you think you are? You think that you have the right to know about this? I mean, and to some extent, that kind of an attitude is not excusable, but logical to some extent, because you're sitting on, as you said earlier, the biggest secret of all time. You are perhaps even to some extent interfacing with extraterrestrial or at least non-human entities, receiving information in regard to physics, right? In regard to unknown technologies that you are secretly developing. I mean, this is going to create a God complex in
Just saw a weird light outside my window for a second. It was just like a flash, like in my backyard. Weird.
the military personnel and the CEOs of these aerospace companies who are developing this technology. It's I always go back to the terminology that you coined years ago.
It's probably some tweaker with a flashlight.
It's a breakaway civilization, a mentality in which, like, we have superseded you. We have technology that you can't even imagine.
This is what I was getting to. They have technology that we can't even imagine. What are we gonna do? Nothing. There's nothing we can do. They have all the cards.
We have power that in regard, in terms of knowledge, that supersedes anything that the quote unquote conventional government has. And so I think to some degree there's this, you're dealing with this God complex, and perhaps individuals who are in charge of these programs who are nefarious and not in every case, but I think there are certain individuals involved in the aerospace programs, in elements of the military industrial complex that are overseeing these programs, that are not good people. And
this is what I said earlier. I've already watched this, so I already knew what to expect. So I'm watching it again with you. I think he's onto something right here.
And certainly
no, absolutely.
Certainly not patriotic. Certainly
Think
not
of John
operating.
Brennan. John Brennan, just for starters, this man is a
Precisely.
pathological liar, head of CIA. You can tell when he lies because his lips are moving. That's John Brennan, and he's
Clapper
just
as well.
one of these people. What's
Stephen
that?
Greer
Clapper
says
as well, I would say.
James Clapper, absolutely.
Yeah.
Pathological liars, these people.
James Comey.
And the contempt that they have for American citizens, people around the world, is astonishing. It's breathtaking. And the fact that they can get into the positions of power that they have really says a lot, and it says bad things about the United States.
And who are
that caliber
they
are running?
If they're not working for the United States government for the interest of the American people, who are they working for? Who is benefiting? That's really the question, I think, at the heart of this inquiry. Who is benefiting from the secrecy, from the technology, from the knowledge? Because it's not us. The American people aren't benefiting at all. We are not benefiting from this. And maybe the intelligence community would argue, well, we are, because we have, defense weaponry that we've developed that will protect America, whatever. But there's no direct benefit that I can can discern from the secrecy, from the reverse engineering, and all of this. So the question is, who is benefiting? Who is this group? And are we dealing with at the highest echelons of the so-called secrecy group? Are we dealing with something akin to the occult? Is it something like that? Are these people? Is this some sort of a cabal at the top of this? I'm just speculating here because it just seems so nefarious to me. Yeah. And as I think about the secrecy group, I can't help but also contemplate the kinds of things that I've been investigating over the last year, and my followers know that I went into the Amazon and investigated in Peru and investigated this very, very bizarre situation that's been unfolding and continues to unfold in the Peruvian and Brazilian Amazon in regard to these, the so-called face peelers who very clearly are in possession of advanced technology, advanced aerospace technology, if the testimony of the villagers is to be believed. And I happen to believe them because so many of them, I don't think I ever got a chance to talk to you about this, Richard, but so many of them described to me not just these very bizarre assailants who are covered in body armor, black body armor head to foot, flying around on these circular hoverboards, platforms, but also so many of the villagers described craft that would hover silently over the village. Sometimes it had some sort of a transparent mesh, but they all described it. They drew it in the dirt for me, a few of them, and one of them drew it on an acrylic board. They all drew the same thing. They described this craft, great specificity, and it clearly is some kind of advanced aerospace vehicle, clearly. So somebody is in possession, and as my audience well knows,
Peru?
I've seen this myself. I've seen craft like this myself with my own eyes hovering above my car, 40 feet above my car. Somebody is in possession of advanced aerospace vehicles, and at least some of the activity is very nefarious. Very, very nefarious. So again, I go back to the question, who benefits? Are we dealing with some sort of an occult group at the top of this thing, or at least a faction whose in possession of some of this. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, very interesting question. I think a couple of
Yeah, I mean, think of it. When he went down there, he said that the witnesses said that these entities spoke Spanish. One of them sounded like a local, and the other one sounded like a gringo, a white person speaking Spanish. So, what if there were some of these drug cartels that pretty much run, the world's drug trade? They work very closely with some of these intelligence agencies. You don't think if we wanted to stop the drug trade, they could do it. They could do it like that. They would literally send in a couple SEAL teams all at once, hit all the spots, and be over. Burn all the crops, blow up all the factories, and be over. What if some of these heads of these drug cartels are working with some of these intelligence agents, and they have they all believe in blood sacrifice and ensuing fear into people, going around ripping people's faces off. What if they had access to this technology? I mean, you have to think these cartels make billions of dollars a year, highly profitable, costs very little to make. What, like, their profit margin is ridiculous. So I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, you have some of these cartels that go around like just slaughtering people, and the way they leave messages and stuff, it's very messy. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised if some of these people that run these drug cartels are bumping elbows with people that run these programs, and they have their own personal crafts, and they go out on these expeditions hunting people for fun. I know that sounds insane, but from what I've experienced and others have talked about with the whole inducing fear and feeding on conflicts, think of, like the thing I said earlier about the old gods wanting blood sacrifice, having Indians go and kill tribes hundreds of miles away just for the sake of killing them. I think these people they're working with these intelligence agencies, and they're also working with this higher intelligence that's very nefarious. Um, and then, you start thinking about like, good versus evil, you know, angels versus demons and fallen angels, you know. Um, yeah, there's just so many questions, but yeah, what if? That's the question I want to know. It's one of the questions I want to know. Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? Is there such thing as good and bad? Does it even matter? So, anyways.
things. People like Clapper and Brennan, I think, they're looking out for themselves. They are power-hungry maniacs. That's what I would say. First of all, they love power. They're addicted to power. But beyond that, they're obviously not at the top of the food chain as well, as I think you rightly point out. Who's above them? Well, this is the question that we all ask. So when you get into the human power structure, when you really study it, whether you're studying for example, the World Economic Forum or the Bilderberg Group, which I've been looking back into just of late. When you study the, allegations, let's just say, of some people who've broken ranks with the elite of the elite, you find, again, the same claims come up again and again, that there is a potential occult element to this. That's right, that they believe that They have the key to certain dark arts. They understand how to manipulate reality to that extent to use it for their benefit. And this is a rumor, but it's come out countless times from different sources. Deep levels of mind control are alleged to have occurred, human sacrifice. I mean, we're getting to some really outlandish claims, but they keep coming up. And I'll just state, like, I don't know what the truth is, but I put nothing past these people. The more power someone gets, the more you can expect, the more depraved they're likely to become.
Yep. When people get large amounts of money, like really really rich, they start getting really fucking weird. They start doing weird shit. It's a fact.
The more, you know, they just want a thrill. They want to
Yep.
live forever. They want to have all the
Life
fun that they
becomes
want.
boring
And when
because
you
they
can
have
have
everything at their
everything you
fingertips.
want, it keeps pushing you into more and more depraved areas.
Yep. Literally, they have everything. They can do whatever they want, so life becomes boring. So they have to keep pushing the limits, of what they're doing in their lives to keep it exciting.
firmly believe that.
It's sick. It's disgusting.
So I do think that we're looking at a ultra global elite that is above the law. They do what they want, and they are probably in deep levels of depravity. I would believe all of that. So then you go beyond them, and by the way, I think that's probably true. So I think you got a few thousand individuals who, when you get right down to it, are above the law. Law doesn't apply to them. But then are they aware of or have any communication with what's top side of them? So if there's an alien intelligence, visitors that are here, how does all that work? And I don't know. I don't have the full answer to that. But I think that we have enough bits of testimony that I do.
Ceremonies. They summon them. Literally summon these entities into existence by doing sick, depraved, disgusting things to people.
Believe that show that we've had some level of communication, including through the U.S. military. So I think that I'm a believer in the story by Dan Sherman called Above Black. Dan Sherman wrote about this, his experience in the 1980s and 90s with the U.S. Air Force, about a level of communication with these other beings, some of which had a telepathic component to it. It's very interesting the way he writes about it. He's not the only person who's talked about communication. So I think that a group or multiple groups that are here have an agenda. One of the things that some of them need, apparently, is for the U.S. government and other powerful governments to just lay off, just back off. I think their attitude is, we're here for something. We can discuss maybe some of this with you. Some of it we're not going to discuss with you, but we need you to back the heck away. We'll have an arrangement with you. We won't cause you a hassle as long as you don't give us a hassle. I think that there's some of that going on.
Yeah, so we could be looking at a scenario, and of course, this is just speculation. We could be looking at a scenario in which at the very top, upper echelon, the pinnacle of this secrecy group is communicating, cooperating, coordinating perhaps with malevolent non-human factions.
Malevolent or not all malevolent. I try to be fair here, and I can't say that I know all of the agendas. What I go by are two things. I go by the testimony that alleged abductees and contactees have. And I say alleged, but I believe many of them. And then I go by logic. What makes sense to me? And that's admittedly, look, I can't prove some of these things, but it makes sense to me based on all the testimony that we have more than one type of group of entity that's here. I think we may have many that are actually operating here. For this time in our history, it makes perfect sense to me. 200 years ago, there would not have been the interest or the need that other beings would necessarily have had in our world, at least if we human beings were of any interest to them. We didn't have a capability of dealing with them in any way. We do now. We're not on their level, I'm sure, scientifically, but we have nuclear weapons. We have laser technology. We've got artificial intelligence. We're manipulating our genetic material with CRISPR. We've got nanotech. All of this has happened at once. Now they're interested. Of course they're interested. We have the ability to manipulate data to a degree that was unheard of even one generation ago, to say nothing of 100 years ago. That's important. We don't really appreciate that much. So they can see all of that. And now we've got their attention because they know we're about to be able to do things. Not necessarily to threaten them per se, but enough that we're interesting. So yeah, we're bringing the neighborhood in.
Yeah, and this this is beginning to broach a topic that I want to put a pin in it here, and have this discussion with you at a future date. But I think there's an interesting connection here between the UFO phenomenon, what we're seeing unfold, and transhumanism, a post-human paradigm on planet Earth. And I know you have a lot to say about that. You spoke at our True Legends conference that was the theme was transhumanism. And there's a very interesting crossover, and you and I see it the same way. So we'll put a pin in that conversation and have that conversation later. But I think that's a very important conversation. I think it's directly related to the UFO phenomenon and some of the interests that you're talking about in non-human factions in the human race right now. So,
in short.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to part 2 of this. This is the first time I've ever seen. No. I think this is like the second interview I've ever seen them do with each other. But anyways, thank you for joining me. I know it was a long video, and I only talk in a few segments, but that's okay. I'm not trying to reach everybody. I'm just trying to reach those that are interested in the topic. And those that are interested in the topic, you know who you are. You know how exciting something like this can be. Seeing these two guys in a stream together, I think that's awesome. So if you liked the video, if you like the stream, give me a like, share, subscribe. I'm always looking for other experiencers to come on and have a dialogue with and share our experiences, and just kind of go over the data, and kind of try to put the puzzle together. So if you are an experiencer or a contactee, or you've had a sighting, please feel free to email me at fdfanatic541@gmail.com. I believe it's in my description on my channel. That's FD, so Frank Dog Fanatic 541@gmail.com. And I'd love to, set up an interview with anyone, really. This is a grassroots community, so please feel free. I think there's a lot of good things coming in the future with all of the sightings and the contact that's going on. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.